in the gearbox if you're right at threshold braking with the rear tires. So that helps, and it also just helps. The biggest thing is not having to look at your shift lights. You know, audibly knowing, you just get used to it, knowing I'm hearing an RPM range that's red line. You know, I'm pretty much there. So it's a little harder on like Indianapolis because the gear stack's so close together that you're talking about really finite range of gear splits. So the lights are pretty helpful. But on the road course, you don't need it as much.
Okay. Can you hear other cars around you?
Yeah, I suppose. Certainly when they're in front of you or maybe just ahead of you, but not when they're behind you.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about visually? And again, I'm kind of trying to look at, the things that I wonder, is sim racing doing a good job of simulating beyond the physics of the car and the track itself, but things like the noise, the sound. What about visually? When you're going 200, what are you seeing? Do you get tunnel vision? I mean, you see the movies and they bring it all in and everything's sped up. Does that happen?
Not really. Your helmet, the way a car racing helmet's designed is a very small eye port anyway, so it gets you sort of focusing on the right things in the right direction.
Okay. You had mentioned cold tires.
Yeah.
And the simulation, that's another area that I wonder how well, because tire temperature is very important in racing. How well do the sims seem to mimic that? Or we'll stick with iRacing. Let's not talk sims in general. But in iRacing, how well and how much time does it take? Does it seem proper? And also the other question I'll ask you too, what about coming in off of the track at full speed and slowing down for like a pit speed limit? How well does it do that as well? And is the car tricky at that moment?
Well, I just totally shunned it at Indianapolis, trying to come into the pit lane hot and hit the pit lane attenuator. So the tire feel relationship, that the physics involved in the tire, I think that's the hardest part, is creating the feel of the rubber on the road. That's the last frontier, I think, for sim racing, is optimizing that.
Sure. I think Dave Kemmer would even agree with you. And he's
I don't know. Yeah.
He's the one doing the tires for this one.
Because everything else is very predictable, right? I mean, if the track says there's a bump here and it's this big and this deep and the car's going this fast, the suspension's going to move this much and do all of this. The tire-ground relationship, I hate to use the term black art, but it
is.
Pardon the pun. I guess that's kind of part of it. So that's the area of slip angle and like just things like when the tire pressures are coming up and the rubber is warming and the carcass kind of loosens and becomes more pliable, generating additional grip into the steering, and that whole physics model I think is probably the most important, and that's the part that I need to make it even more real.
And here's what Dave Kemmer had to say about tires.
When we talk about the tires in a racing sim, I mean, it really is the most important force element on the car. That really is, in short, what racing is about. I mean, the aerodynamics is complicated, but it's possible to measure the aerodynamic performance and parameterize it to a degree where you can reproduce it. The tires, they can run in so many different regimes of load and temperature and pressure, how much wear they have, different surfaces, all this stuff. It's all, even amongst the, within the automotive industry and the tire industry, there are still not really well understood physically based models.
What about setup change? I mean, I know we talked off the camera about engineers and they do extensive work on this stuff, but when you've clicked around and played with things, are you getting the type of results out of the car that you expected before you clicked and said, I want to try this?
Most times, yeah. And what's been interesting for me, especially since the Indy car came out on this, and again, I don't do a lot of this, but when I start to go in the setup, all of a sudden it's like, boy, I haven't had to do this for a while. Like basically forever.
Right.
Because I'm always working with a race engineer.
Right.
And I'm complaining about, this is what it does here in this part of the corner and this corner, and here's where I think, we really could improve the handling. But I'm not making suggestions. I'm not saying, let's go with 200-pound spring and this. If I did that, then I wouldn't need a race engineer.
Right.
And I mean, I'm capable of leading the car towards that direction, but it's there's a reason that race teams, especially the good race teams, have a really developed a process for how to lead the car setup in a certain direction.
Right.
And I would think even for me, I can find myself easily lost on setup,
right.
Very quickly. So it's got to be hard for people that, aren't even around real racing all
right.
the time.
So if you called your race engineer and said, I'm here in a sim, what do I do next?
Yeah.
Would he laugh at you, or would he tell you what to do
He'd
next?
say, I'm on my day off, But I think that's why, especially in Formula One, the friends that I have in F1 drivers and engineers, the amount of simulator work between driver and engineer now is staggering.
Right.
It's amazing. I mean, there are guys that are in mid-level teams that are on a simulator 3-4 days a week now, every week,
right.
with engineers. It's like an 8-hour day.
Right.
I mean, it's full on preparing for the next track.
And is that being done, do you think, for the engineers or for the driver?
Both.
Huh.
Absolutely both. And that's how good this stuff is now.
Right.
And the fact that it's available for anybody.
All right, I just came across one other question that I've been dying to ask a real-life driver, and that's about the gas and brake pedal relationship, like trail braking, really, in sim racing. A lot of people think that the sims require you to leave a little bit of gas on for some balanced throttle. A lot of people think that that's an unrealistic thing that drivers wouldn't do, or that the brakes of a car couldn't handle if you did it to it all day long. Is this a wives' tale? Is this real? What are your feelings on that?
I never do that in a real car. Certainly not in a car that has a mechanical throttle, which an Indy car does.
Right.
However, in Formula One, there's been systems for years that have various names, but the essential intent is to have anti-lock brakes on the rear. And the way they do that, because it's all fly-by-wire electronics and all of that,
right.
The way they do that is essentially, adding throttle or neutralizing the engine drag, if you will, to the rear tires as a way to prevent rear lockup.
Okay.
Right? ABS technically, as the sensor says, the rotor's stopping, release the caliper. Right. That's illegal. So Formula One teams have developed ways to get around that say, okay, the rotor's starting to stop, add power, or release some engine drag, that kind of thing. So there could be something to it in the sim world. I don't try it on this, but maybe that's where that second and a half comes from. I don't know.
All right. Well, Townsend, I appreciate the moment with you.
My pleasure.
It's been insightful. We're all rooting for you coming Memorial Day. I think every sim racer in the world is going to be rooting for you.
Cool.
And
well, there's going to be an enormous CXC logo on the very back of my helmet, so keep an eye out for that.
Very cool. We'll definitely be looking for that.
All right.
And maybe we'll catch up with you there as well.
All right, thanks.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Wow, what a great interview with Townsend Bell.
Thank you.
Very good work. Very good work.
You know what's cool about that? I went into that kind of with some presumptions. I asked some questions thinking I was going to get certain types of answers like sound and tire friction, and I was wrong. But the sims are very correct. So, I mean, all in all, sims have come so far, and it was blatantly obvious talking to them.
And he was actually using those 3D glasses and a 3D monitor while he was racing, so I imagine that had a different effect.
That was insane. I actually stayed for a couple hours later just driving it myself, and it was one of the most incredible things. We've got to get him on the show. And so in case you saw the blurry vision, that was actually 3D, and that's why he was wearing those glasses.
Thank you again, Townsend Bell. We wish you all the luck this weekend at Indy 500. All of us here will be rooting for you, and all the sim racers out there will be rooting for you as well, and good luck on the track out there.
And thanks to Chris at CXC, who actually helped arrange the whole meeting between us and Townsend. So thank you, Chris.
And I actually got to drive that CXC simulator at one point in time.
Yeah, you got quite a bit of seat time in that rig.